While every family in the mountain settlement raised square timber cabins with pitched roofs and smoking stone chimneys, the boy dug into the hillside instead. He was 16. Thin, quiet, the kind of teenager people talked around, not to. Where others stacked logs and measured beams, he carved a curved hollow into frozen earth, shaping the ground itself like it was clay. By early autumn, what he was building didn't look like a house at all. It looked like a wound in the mountain, a low mound of dirt, straw pressed into soil, a dark wooden door half buried beneath 3 feet of earth. People stopped calling it strange. They started calling it stupid. Men laughed when they passed. Women shook their heads. Someone said it looked like a grave waiting for its owner. And when the wind began to sharpen, when frost started biting through wool coats, the laughter grew louder, because winter was coming, and everyone believed the mountain would finish what the boy had started. They believed the cold would crush him. They believed the snow would bury him. They believed the earth would cave in and swallow him whole. They were wrong. Before the first snowfall, the boy had already moved more than 12,000 pounds of earth by hand. No horses, no help, no praise. He worked before sunrise and after dark, his breath fogging the air, his hands raw and cracked. Each shovel of dirt went onto the growing mound above the curved frame he had bent from young saplings. Flexible wood, arched and lashed together, forming a dome that distributed weight instead of resisting it. The men who built square cabins didn't understand that. They believed strength meant straight lines. The boy believed strength meant curves. "Builds like a mole," someone muttered. Another said, "Snow flattened that thing first storm." The boy didn't answer. He kept packing earth. What they didn't see was the order beneath the dirt. First came the frame, woven like a basket, each rib supporting the next. Then layers of straw mats, pressed tight to stop moisture. Then soil, heavy clay mixed with fibers, packed in stages. 12 inches. Then 18 more. Then living sod on top, roots binding everything together. 3 feet of earth. Not piled. Engineered. The settlement's most experienced builder stopped one afternoon to watch. 30 years of cabins. Dozens of winters survived. He leaned on his hammer and laughed. "That dirt will collapse," he said. "First real snow. You'll be buried alive." The boy didn't look up. He adjusted his grip on the shovel and kept shaping the curve. "I'm not fighting the cold," he said quietly. "I'm stepping away from it." That answer confused them. Cold was something you fought with fire, with bigger hearths, with thicker logs, with more wood. No one had ever suggested hiding inside the mountain itself. By late October, frost hardened the ground. The boy finished sealing the dome. From a distance, it barely rose above the hillside. Just a rounded mound, grass already taking root. Only the door gave it away. A heavy wooden slab recessed into the earth, angled so the wind couldn't rush straight inside. Inside, the air smelled of soil and straw. Dry. Still. A small stone hearth sat against the curved wall. No massive fireplace. No towering chimney. Just enough. People shook their heads when they saw it. Too small. Too low. Too dark. Someone said no woman would ever live in a hole like that. Someone else said no child raised there would survive a winter. The boy listened, and said nothing. The first cold snap came in November. Timber cabins burned with day and night just to keep frost off the walls. Smoke poured from chimneys. Axes rang constantly as wood piles shrank faster than expected. Inside the earth shelter, the boy burned less than half as much fuel. When his fire died at night, the walls stayed warm. That confused a few people. They started stopping by in the mornings, pretending to check traps or mend fences, placing their hands briefly against the dirt-covered walls. They didn't say anything, but they noticed. By December, snow settled deep in the forest. The boy's shelter disappeared beneath it, the dome shedding wind instead of catching it. Snow piled gently, adding insulation instead of weight. Corners didn't exist. Nothing to grab, nothing to tear away. Inside, the temperature barely moved. The mountain did the work. Old men began watching the sky. They felt it coming. A stillness. A pressure. The kind of silence that meant something vast was moving. On January 15th, the cold arrived. Not gently. Not gradually. It fell from the north like a blade. By morning, the thermometer outside the timber cabins read far below anything most of them had seen. Wind screamed through chinks and seams, slipping through places no one had known existed. By nightfall, the temperature dropped even further. Wood cracked. Trees exploded in the forest as frozen sap split trunks open. Livestock froze standing up, Inside the cabins, families fed fires until their eyes burned and their hands blistered. Furniture went into the flames, then floorboards, then structural beams. Still, the cold came through. Walls conducted it inward. Roofs bled heat into the sky. The wind found every weakness. Children cried. Breath froze on blankets. Fingers went numb inches from fire. By the third night, some cabins couldn't stay above freezing even with constant flames. Inside the earth shelter, the boys slept without waking. The temperature held steady. The fire burned low. The walls released warmth slowly, like a bank paying out savings earned months before. 3 feet of soil doesn't change temperature quickly. It remembers. Outside, the cold sharpened into something lethal. The wind reached hurricane force, stripping heat from exposed skin in seconds. People wrapped scarves across their faces, just to breathe. A child died 2 cabins over. Then another. The settlement realized they were losing. On the 4th night, a man stumbled through waist-deep snow toward the hillside. Behind him, his wife and children followed, tied together with ropes so the wind wouldn't tear them apart. They reached the half-buried door and pounded on it with frozen hands. The boy opened it. Warm air spilled out like breath from a living thing. Steam rose from frozen coats as they collapsed inside. They didn't speak at first. They couldn't. The contrast stunned them into silence. The walls were warm to the touch. The air felt soft, alive. More people came. Then more. They left failing cabins behind and fought their way toward the hillside. By the end of the week, more than 24 people crowded inside a space built for one. And still, the temperature held. Body heat fed the walls. The walls stored it. The mountain did the rest. The boy moved quietly among them, adjusting ventilation channels, showing where fresh air entered low and stale air escaped high. The system worked without drafts, without heat loss. No smoke buildup. No suffocation. No panic. Someone asked how he knew it would work. He shrugged. The earth changes slow, he said. Once it's warm, it stays warm. Outside, the storm raged for days. When it finally loosened its grip, the settlement counted the cost. Dozens dead across the region. Timber cabins failed not because they were poorly built, but because they were built on the wrong assumptions. They tried to fight winter. The boy ignored it. When the thaw came, men walked the hillside and studied the dome that had saved them. No cracks. No collapse. No rot. Just grass growing thicker on top. They stopped laughing. Years later, people would copy the design. They would call it smart. They would call it efficient. They would call it ahead of its time. But none of them would remember how ridiculous it looked at first. How foolish it seemed. How certain they were that the boy had buried himself alive. Winter had judged. And winter had chosen the dirt mound over every proud timber wall. The first real test came in early November, long before anyone expected trouble. The mountains went quiet in a way only old places know how to go quiet. Birds vanished from the ridgelines. Wind stopped moving through the trees. Smoke from chimneys rose straight up instead of drifting away. The older settlers noticed it immediately, even if they didn't say anything out loud. The teenage boy noticed too. He stood just inside the low doorway of his half-buried shelter, watching frost creep across the clearing where timber cabins sat exposed to the open air. His structure barely showed above ground now. Just a rounded rise of earth pressed into the hillside, capped with sod already beginning to knit itself together. From a distance, it looked less like a house and more like a part of a mountain that had always been there. The boy did not smile at that thought. He only adjusted the wool cap on his head and went back inside. Inside, the air felt different. Not warm exactly, just steady. The kind of steadiness you only notice when you step back outside and feel how sharp the cold really is. He placed a small armful of split wood into the hearth and lit it carefully, slowly, the way he always did. No rush, no waste. He watched the flame catch, then stepped back and let the fire do what fire was meant to do. The walls absorbed the heat without complaint. 3 feet of packed earth, and straw did not glow or crackle or creak like timber. They simply accepted the warmth and held it. The boy pressed his palm against the curved wall and waited. After a moment, the cold faded from his skin. Outside, the settlement's cabins were already struggling. By mid-November, smoke poured constantly from their chimneys. Fires were kept going day and night, even when temperatures hovered just below freezing. The older men blamed poor wood. The younger ones blamed drafty chinking. Everyone blamed something. No one blamed the design. They still laughed when they passed the boys' shelter. Living like a badger. One man muttered as he walked by with an axe over his shoulder. "Wait till the rains come," another said. "He'll be sleeping in mud." The boy heard them. He always heard them. He never answered. He spent those weeks refining details no one else noticed. He checked drainage channels after every rain. He adjusted the woven straw layer where settling had occurred. He reopened a ventilation gap near the top of the dome and angled it slightly so warm air could escape without pulling cold air in. He worked in silence, guided by notes written decades earlier in a hand that trembled with age. The journals said nothing about pride, only about survival. Late November brought the first real freeze. It came at night, fast and hard. Water left in buckets turned solid before morning. Frost thickened on cabin walls from the inside. Doors swelled and jammed. Fires burned hotter, faster. The teenage boy slept through it. Not because he was reckless, because the shelter didn't change. When he woke before dawn, the air inside was the same temperature it had been the night before. The fire had died down to coals, but the walls still held the warmth they had borrowed hours earlier. He added a single log, brewed a thin cup of tea, and ate quietly. Across the clearing, a man woke his children every hour to feed their fire. By December, the settlement stopped laughing. They didn't apologize. They didn't praise him. They simply watched. They noticed how little smoke came from the boy's low chimney, how he never chopped wood in a panic, how he carried himself without hurry even as the cold deepened. Someone mentioned it casually one evening. "Funny thing," a woman said while wrapping a scarf tighter around her neck. "That dirt place of his never see him rushing for firewood." Her husband grunted, probably just stubborn. But the seed had been planted. The boy felt the change in their eyes, even if their words stayed the same. December hardened the mountains. Snow came early and stayed late. It pressed down on cabin roofs in heavy, wet layers that had to be shoveled off daily. Icicles formed inside door frames. Wind found every weakness timber had to offer. The half-buried shelter did not care. Snow slid harmlessly down its curved back and piled against the hillside, where it only added insulation. Wind passed over it without grip or purchase. Cold pressed inward, slowed, then stopped. The boy spent long evenings listening, not to the storm, to the structure itself. Earth shifts. Wood complains. Stone answers slowly. He learned the difference by sound alone. When the shelter settled, he adjusted. When moisture tried to creep in, he redirected it. By the solstice, something in the weather broke. The pressure dropped fast. The sky went pale. Clouds flattened into a single unbroken sheet. Old men stepped outside and felt it in their joints. This was not an ordinary winter. This was the kind of winter people remembered. The storm arrived without drama. No thunder. No warning howl. Just a deepening cold that refused to leave. Temperatures plunged below anything the settlement had recorded. Wind returned with purpose, cutting through gaps and cracks like water through stone. Fires burned constantly and still failed. Families began sleeping in shifts to keep flames alive. Furniture disappeared into hearths. Floorboards followed. The teenage boy added one log every few hours. On the third night, someone knocked on his door. It was hesitant, almost embarrassed. He opened it to find a man standing rigid in the snow, beard stiff with ice, eyes rimmed red from cold and fear. Behind him stood two children wrapped in too many layers and not enough warmth. The boy stepped aside without a word. Warmth spilled out into the night like breath. The man froze, not from cold this time, but from disbelief. He had expected damp earth, darkness, smoke. Instead, he felt his lungs loosen. Inside, the walls radiated heat softly, like the sun remembered through stone. The air was clean, fresh, alive. The boy gestured toward the far side of the shelter, where blankets were already laid. "Sit," he said quietly. More came before dawn, then more. They arrived in silence at first, ashamed to be seen. Later, they came openly, dragging sleds, carrying the elderly, clutching infants bundled in every scrap of cloth they owned. No one mocked now. No one explained. They simply survived. The shelter was never meant for this many bodies. But Earth did not complain. It absorbed their heat and gave it back. Breath condensed and vanished. Walls warmed further. Outside, cabins failed. Roofs cracked under ice. Fires died when wood ran out. Wind tore heat away faster than it could be made. Inside the half-buried shelter, the temperature barely shifted. The boy moved constantly, quietly, adjusting airflow, managing the fire, teaching without lecturing. He showed them where to sit, Went out to block vents. How to layer clothing properly indoors so sweat would not steal heat later. He never said, "I told you so." He never said anything unnecessary at all. By the 5th day, the storm reached its worst. Trees shattered in the distance with sharp, echoing cracks. Livestock froze where they stood. Sound itself seemed to freeze in the air. The settlement would later count the dead. That count did not include anyone inside the earth shelter. When the storm finally broke, it did not leave all at once. It loosened its grip reluctantly, as if offended that the mountain had resisted. The boy stood outside at dawn on the first clear morning, breath visible, face calm. Behind him, people slept alive. The shelter steamed gently as stored warmth met the cold air. No one laughed now. Weeks later, as winter eased its grip, men walked the structure slowly, hands pressed to the earth, heads lowered. They asked questions. Real questions this time. The boy answered them simply, not with theory, with results. He spoke of soil depth, of shape, of patience, of building with the mountain instead of against it. Some listened, some didn't, but none forgot. Before spring arrived, 2 more shelters began to take shape along the hillside. They were not perfect, but they were learning. By early December, the boys' shelter no longer looked like a project. It looked like a mistake. Snow had fallen twice already. Light storms that dusted the clearing and melted by afternoon. Each time, the mound absorbed it silently. No dramatic runoff, no visible damage. Just a low dome of earth with a narrow wooden door facing downslope. That quiet endurance made his neighbors uneasy. They preferred structures that announced their strength. Straight walls, sharp corners, tall chimneys, buildings that stood apart from the land, not buried inside it. The boys' shelter did the opposite. It hid. Marcus, the most experienced builder in the settlement, circled it one morning with his hands on his hips, boots crunching through frost. He kicked at the packed earth with the toe of his boot. "Looks solid now," he muttered. "That's what makes it dangerous." The boy was inside at the time, kneeling near the hearth, stacking split wood with slow, deliberate movements. He had learned early not to rush heat. Fires that flared too hot wasted fuel and shocked stone. Fires that burned steady taught walls how to hold warmth. Outside, Marcus spoke to anyone who would listen. "Snow loads build gradual," he said. "Earth don't bend. Timber flexes. When weight comes, this thing won't sag. It'll give all at once." The others nodded. They trusted experience that came with numbers. Decades. Cabins counted in dozens. The boy had none of that. What he had were journals wrapped in oilcloth, written in cramped handwriting by a grandfather who believed winters were teachers, not enemies. Inside the shelter, the air smelled faintly of damp soil and smoke. Not stale, not sharp, just present. The boy pressed his palm against the curved wall. It was cool, not cold. That mattered. He listened. Outside, wind threaded through the pines, searching for edges to bite. The shelter had none. That night, the temperature dropped faster than expected. The sky cleared completely. Stars sharp and numerous, the kind of sky old people watched with concern. Cold pooled in the valley like water. By morning, ice glazed the inside of timber cabins. Breath hung thick near ceilings. Fires that had burned through the night left only stubborn coals. The boy woke before dawn, not because he was cold, because the walls had changed. Earth spoke quietly when temperatures shifted fast. He felt it in the way sound carried, and how the floor no longer felt neutral underfoot, but gently cool, like a stream stone in shade. He added 2 small splits to the hearth. Nothing more. The fire did not roar. It breathed. When the sun rose, the settlement stirred sluggishly. Doors opened reluctantly. People stepped out wrapped in blankets, faces tight. Someone noticed smoke rising from a boy's shelter. "Thin, steady. Must be burning early," a woman said. Marcus snorted. "He'll need it. Wait till January." December settled in hard after that. Each day grew shorter, each night colder. Cabins demanded more. More wood, more attention, more patience. Chimneys smoked thick and constant. Axes rang from dawn to dusk as men split faster than planned, their winter stacks shrinking too soon. The boys' woodpile stayed the same size. That did not go unnoticed. A surveyor named Whitmore commented on it during a communal meal. "Either he's freezing," he said, "or he's lying." No one contradicted him. No one asked the boy. He passed through the settlement quietly, carrying water, trading small goods, nodding when spoken to, never defending himself. Defenses, he believed, wasted heat. The first serious storm arrived without ceremony. Snow began in the afternoon, thick and wet, falling straight down. By evening, wind rose and began sculpting drifts against every vertical surface it could find. Cabins groaned. Roofs creaked under accumulating weight. Men climbed ladders in the dark to push snow off pitched roofs, breath freezing in beards, fingers burning with cold. The boy stayed inside. Snow slid off his shelter gradually, shedding along the curve, distributing weight instead of collecting it. By morning, his door was half buried. He dug it out calmly, shovel strokes measured, never fighting the snow, only redirecting it. Someone watched from a cabin porch. He's gonna trap himself, they said. But the door opened inward, recessed and angled. It always had. Inside, the air was unchanged. That storm passed without loss. Then another came, and another. By late December, the wood piles of the settlement no longer looked comfortable. They looked calculated, counted, measured in days, not months. The boys' shelter remained unchanged. Snow lay thick across the mound now, insulating it further. The earth beneath never froze. That worried Marcus more than collapse ever had. He walked over one evening, uninvited, stopping just short of the door. "You keeping warm in there?" he asked, voice edged with challenge. "Yes," the boy replied. Nothing more. Marcus waited, expecting elaboration. None came. "How much would you burning?" The boy thought for a moment. "Less than last week." Marcus stared at the door. "That ain't how winter works." The boy said nothing. Marcus left unsettled. January arrived like a held breath finally released. On the 12th, the wind shifted. Old men noticed first. Birds vanished. Sound carried too far. Smoke fell straight down. Pressure dropped. By the 14th, even the confident ones felt it. The boy woke before dawn and did not light a fire. He sat instead, listening. The walls were warm. Not from flame, but from memory. Earth remembered heat. He checked the ventilation channels, clearing frost, adjusting nothing else. Outside, the first reports came in. Livestock stiffening. Water barrels freezing solid overnight. Fingers numb before chores were finished. The temperature fell all day. By nightfall, it had fallen beyond what most people had ever experienced. Fires roared in every cabin. They still weren't enough. Wind arrived after midnight. Not gusts. Not howls. Pressure. It pushed. It found seams and cracks and forced itself inside. Cabins leaked cold the way boats leak water. By morning, frost coated interior walls. Blankets stiffened. Children cried without tears because tears froze. The boy's shelter did not change. Inside, the air was calm. He added wood twice that day. Just twice. By the 15th night, the temperature plunged further. People stopped sleeping. They sat close to hearths, rotating children in and out of the narrow band of survivable warmth. Wood vanished at an alarming rate. Someone knocked on the boy's door. It was Marcus. His beard was rimed with ice. His eyes looked older than they had a week before. "How warm is it in there?" he asked, not accusatory now. Curious, almost pleading. The boy opened the door. Warmth spilled out, visible as steam met frozen air. Marcus froze where he stood. Not from cold, from understanding. Inside, the curved walls glowed faintly, not with light, but with stored heat. The air felt heavy, alive, unlike the sharp dryness of timber cabins. Marcus stepped in without being invited. He touched the wall. It was warm. Not hot. Not artificial. Human. "How?" he whispered. The boy shrugged slightly. "It's been learning the fire since October." Marcus looked around. The space was small. Simple. Nothing excessive. No drafts. No roar of flame. Just balance. He left without speaking further. That night, the temperature dropped again. Beyond expectation. Beyond records. Wind screamed through the valley, flattening snow into ice. Trees cracked and split with gunshot sounds as sap froze and expanded. People burned furniture, then floorboards, then parts of their walls. Still, the cold came. The boy lay awake, listening to wind try and fail to find an edge. He knew what was coming next. Cold like this never traveled alone. It brought decisions with it, and desperation. By early February, the storm had taken everything it intended to take. The wind that had screamed through the mountains for nearly 2 weeks began to lose its edge. The temperature still hovered well below zero, but the murderous urgency was gone. Snowdrifts hardened into silent walls. Trees no longer cracked apart in the night. The mountains, having spent their fury, settled back into a heavy, watchful stillness. Inside the earth-covered shelter, the teenage boy noticed the change before anyone else did. He felt it in the walls. The soil that had been radiating stored warmth day and night began to cool at a slower pace. The fire needed slightly more tending. Breath no longer fogged instantly near the doorway. The mountain was releasing its grip. The boy did not announce this. He simply adjusted, adding one more log to the fire, opening the ventilation channel a finger's width wider, shifting where people slept so the youngest and weakest stayed closest to the warmest walls. 31 people had survived inside a space never meant to hold more than one. They had eaten thin soup and ration bread. They had slept shoulder to shoulder, listening to the storm batter the mountain overhead. They had shared stories in whispers at night, afraid that noise itself might invite the cold back in. And now, slowly, the danger was passing. On the morning the temperature rose above zero for the first time since mid-January, the older builder stepped outside. His boots sank into snow packed hard as stone. The world looked ruined. Cabins leaned. Roofs had collapsed inward. Chimneys lay broken. Smoke no longer rose from most homesteads. He turned back toward the low mound pressed into the hillside. From the outside, it still looked foolish. Just dirt. Straw. A door half buried in earth. From the inside, it had been the difference between life and death. The boy stepped out after him, his breath steady, his posture calm. He looked thinner now. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes, but his movements were unhurried, controlled. The older builder stared at him for a long moment. Then he removed his hat. "I was wrong," he said quietly. The boy said nothing. "I told people you were burying yourself alive." The man continued. "I said no one with sense would live in the dirt. I said winter would crush you." The man swallowed. "It crushed us instead." The boy nodded once, not in agreement, not in triumph, just acknowledgement. That same day, families began returning to what remained of their homes. Some cabins could be repaired. Others would need to be rebuilt entirely. A few were beyond saving, nothing but frozen debris and memories left behind. The settlement had lost people. Names were spoken softly. Empty places were noticed at meals. Grief moved through the valley like a low fog. But one fact could not be ignored. The only structure that had never failed was the one everyone had mocked. In the weeks that followed, visitors came, not to stare, but to ask questions. How thick were the walls? Why the curved ceiling? How did the air stay clean? Why didn't the snow crush it? The boy answered when asked. He never lectured, never corrected harshly, never used language that made anyone feel small. He explained things the way his grandfather had taught him, by pointing, by touching the walls, by letting people feel the warmth stored in the soil even hours after the fire had died. "This part holds heat," he would say, pressing a palm flat against the curved earth. "This part lets air move without letting cold in. Corners trap cold. Curves don't. The ground doesn't change temperature quickly. That's why animals survive underground. No calculations. No pride. Just quiet truths proven by winter itself." By early March, the thaw began in earnest. Snow softened. Water ran beneath the surface. Roofs dripped. The sound of melt returned to the mountains. And something else began to change. The older builder, the same man who had once laughed openly, came back with tools. He didn't ask permission. He didn't announce his intention. He simply started digging. Not a dome. Not yet. First, an earth-bermed wall against the north side of his rebuilt cabin. Then thicker floors. Then a rounded interior ceiling in the root cellar beneath his home. Others followed, not copying blindly, adapting carefully. Some added soil against existing walls. Some dug storage rooms into hillsides. Some built storm shelters shaped like low, curved vaults, covered in earth and sod. No one laughed this time. The surveyor returned as well. He measured airflow, inspected drainage, studied moisture levels inside the shelter. What he found unsettled him. The air was cleaner than most cabins, the humidity steadier, the temperature difference between floor and ceiling minimal. Everything he had feared, dampness, sickness, rot, had not happened. What had happened instead was survival. By spring, the settlement looked different. Not just repaired, but wiser. At the spring gathering, held on ground still muddy from thaw, the older builder stood before everyone. His voice carried less certainty than it once had. "I thought I knew how to build for these mountains," he said. "I thought experience meant mastery." He looked at the teenage boy standing near the edge of the crowd. "I was wrong." The boy did not step forward. He did not bow. He did not speak. The man continued. "I built 58 cabins. Every one of them would have failed if the cold had stayed 2 weeks longer. This 1 inch," he gestured toward the earth-covered mound on the hillside, "never wavered." Silence followed. Not awkward. Respectful. From that point on, the shelter was no longer called foolish. It became a reference, a place people pointed to when planning new builds, a place parents sent their children to feel the warmth and understand that strength doesn't always look impressive. The boy returned to his routines, planting, repairing, reading his grandfather's journals by firelight. He never claimed credit, never told stories of what he had done, but the mountain remembered. Years later, visitors would still come during winter storms, not because they feared ridicule, but because they trusted what had already been proven. The boy grew older, taller, still quiet. The shelter remained. Grass grew thick across its roof. Roots bound the soil tighter each year. From a distance, it looked less like a structure and more like part of the hillside itself, which had always been the point. Long after those who had laughed were gone, the earth still held its warmth, and long after that winter faded into memory, the lesson remained. What looks primitive may be precise. What looks foolish may be refined. And what is mocked today may be what saves lives tomorrow. If you value stories like this, quiet intelligence, survival proven by nature itself, and wisdom that doesn't announce itself, subscribe to the channel. These are the accounts worth remembering,